You're listening to the Bitching and Bolusing Podcast with Courtney and Brittany. Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to the Bitching and Bolusing Podcast. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Courtney. And today we have Jen on the show. Jen is a loving full-time mother who holds a master's degree of social work with over a decade of experience working as a therapist. Jen's entrance into motherhood was a bit traumatic and unexpected. Not only did she have to navigate the birth of her son, but she also had to navigate life inside the walls of a NICU. After 3 months in NICU, Jen was able to take her son home, but although she had to learn how to master the complications that come with medical complexities, she's done it with grace and has created a safe space for other NICU families. When she's not caring for her son, she is providing positive affirmations, information, and resources to families who are navigating similar traumatic NICU experiences that she has had. We appreciate you being here on the show with us today, Jen, and we're so excited to chat. How are you, my dear?
Thank you for having me. I love this opportunity. I'm great.
So I wanted to really kind of jump right into the NICU experience because I know that has really defined your journey so far into motherhood and how it relates to also your background in social work. Particularly, I was scouring your Instagram. I was Instagram stalking you a little. And I did read one of your posts where you talked very briefly in a description of a post how you felt your background in social work really helped guide you and navigate you through your NICU experience. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how that did affect your NICU experience?
Yeah. So it's a little twofold because I'd say it has helped in the advocacy round and really asking for what I need. And, you know, unfortunately, I had the 3 months I was there, I asked to have support from the social work department, the social work team. Never once did I meet with the social work team.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a revolving door. I was able to get all of my resources. I was asking for NICU support groups and education and just things. And even just asking for those things is a big step. You don't know what you don't know. And so I was really in that frame of I need to feel empowered going through this. And I honestly got all my resources through the NICU nurses at the hospital. And I'm like, It's not their job to give those resources. Like, they're busy keeping your baby alive. So I was really... it's easy to critique the field that you're in because I've done hospital social work and school social work. So I think emotionally, though, it was very, I have a great support network, a close-knit family, my girlfriends, a lot of support in that realm. But I guess boundaries were really hard and allowing grace. And as moms, we get into that really easy shame and guilt spiral cycle. And I remember, I was there every single day for 3 months, hours on end. And essentially that was my whole maternity leave. And, even for breastfeed, we couldn't breastfeed, but pumping. When I got home from the hospital, I would pump every 3 hours of the night because I'm like, this is what feels normal. If he was home with me, this is what I would be doing anyway. So it was this weird way to bond and connect and be sleep deprived, even though he wasn't home. And I remember I had family that came into town from out of state around his due date. And I remember feeling guilty about going to see a movie or going to a pumpkin patch or doing all this thing. I'm like, if he was here, if he was home, I wouldn't be able to go see a movie. So it was that self-deprecating, sacrificial thing that you didn't need to do, but it almost made you feel better. It's just a weird kind of, so a lot of those mental things. And I just had a conversation with another NICU mom of you don't get a medal for going to the NICU every day. You can take a break from the NICU. And that didn't register for me.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest parts that I was kicking myself that I had to really process with my husband is after the G-tube surgery. Because I'm like, you know what? If you were in surgery and if you were recovering as an adult, I would be at your bedside overnight. I'd be sleeping in the hospital with you. And it felt so weird after a surgery to be going home after that. I had been there 8+ hours in the day. So as therapists, we're trained to hold kind of other people's stories and the trauma, and, you know, you're kind of separated from that, and you kind of know what you know, but it's such a different experience firsthand going through it yourself and how you react and respond and kind of looking internally for those things.
Yeah, it's not easy to have so much perspective when you're the person involved in a traumatic experience at all.
And actually the education piece, like of my education, it's a lot of like child development, trauma, birth to 5, and how important that, you know, time is and bonding. And it almost made me feel worse knowing how important brain development and like the attachment, and knowing I couldn't be there around the clock for him and with him. And then like, you know, abuse and neglect kids, their brain chemistry changes, and you know, if you don't get that nurture type from a caregiver. And so I'd sit in the NICU and I'd sometimes hear babies cry and cry and cry, and nobody's there to, and I was like, if I'm gone, is that happening to Luca? Like,
aww.
So it's twofold. It was empowering to know some, but then I wasn't specialized or, you know, in-depth knowledge of the actual experience itself. So
NICU is such a strange and terrifying place.
Yeah, it's a mindfuck.
On so many levels.
Yeah.
It's a mindfuck.
Like, holy shit. I'm honestly even like a little bit jittery. Every time I hear somebody else's NICU experience, it just brings me right back. It really does. And it's so crazy. And we had a really interesting NICU experience because oddly enough, despite not knowing what was going to happen during my labor and delivery, when I asked my sister, she's actually a family doctor. She's a pediatrician and internal meds physician. When I asked her, like, hey, what hospital should I birth at? She was like, hey, you really need a hospital with the highest level NICU. And I was like, why? Says who, you know?
You don't expect to go through that.
But I went with her suggestion anyway, and I chose a hospital that had the highest level NICU. But I also happened to choose a hospital that had a newly built NICU. So the whole building was completely brand new. It was barely a year old. And because of that, they had these family suites. So they had these 2 full-on suites. They were like hotel rooms that you could live in the NICU while your child is there.
Wow. What?
Yes. Sounds
That's
amazing,
nice.
right?
Wow.
And it was quite nice. But by day 7, I had not left that NICU.
Yeah.
I lived there for 7 days, me and my husband. He would go out and like grab us food, but I literally only left the hospital for like 1 hour, and I went to grab a bagel once.
Yeah.
By day 7, I actually almost passed out. And the nurses were like, you need to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
And they were so right, because as much as, trust me, I know you guys probably felt this when you were leaving and then coming back, you felt this like loss of like, how can I not be there every second of the day? From experience, it's actually a little bit more traumatizing to be there every second of the day and not have any sort of outside experience or outside exposure to talk to just people and to just have a little bit of normalcy.
And life goes on outside of the NICU.
It does.
Your life continues.
But when you're in there, you're like trapped in this alternate universe. It's so wild. And I remember the first day I came home and I like showered and slept for like 4 hours, and I was like, what the hell is happening? But I still ran back, like right back. But it was such a, I don't know how to explain it, because obviously I was super happy to be there. He was barely like 20 feet from us. Like his room his pod was really that close. And because we were there, they let us go at any point. There was never a restriction on access to him. So if at 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep, I could go and just sit next to him. And from that perspective, I will never say that it was a bad thing. But mentally, it was a little even more of a mind fuck, because I was like, holy shit, this is my world now. NICU is my whole planet. And that's not healthy either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate nurses that say to take breaks because I forget to eat. Like, you're just there. And then it's the balance of like, well, your kid has to rest.
Yeah.
You only interact with them during cares, but it's harder when they get a little bit older in the NICU and they're kind of bored or they are seeking that. But
yeah, no, we were only in the NICU for 11 days, which felt like forever, but we didn't have any like ensuite. They had a little fold out couch inside the NICU room. And I remember the only time I came home to sleep was on day 3. So they were gonna warm Cyrus up, but because he got started later with cooling, they ended up going an extra day with that. So they were like, we're not gonna warm him up tonight. There's no need for you to be here. He's just gonna be where he's at. I had just gotten discharged, and so they were like, just go home. I went home and I had so much anxiety. Like, I remember waking up and I remember going into the bathroom and kind of like taking a good look at myself in the mirror and breaking down. Like, I remember just like hysterically crying because I had all the battle scars of giving birth. And I did. I mean, like, I tore during my birth and all this, and I had all the battle scars, and I was home alone without my baby. And after that, I was like, I'm not leaving this room. And my husband and I, we had this little tiny fold-out couch, and it was like, you know, like your sleepover when you're in high school with your girlfriends, and it's like one was this way and the other was the opposite way, and we're like squeezed on this little couch. And we didn't have a private bathroom at all. We had a shared bathroom with everyone else on the floor. And we did have a social worker that came in, and thankfully she was like, hey, there is a Ronald McDonald's house right across the street. Like, at least get a room and go shower. If you don't sleep there, that's fine. But, like, go use the bathroom, go shower, change your clothes. You can put all of your stuff there so this tiny little room isn't even more cramped with crap. And we did. And, yeah, there was, like, one time that the nurse was like, you gotta go. You gotta go. You guys gotta go eat. Like, he's sleeping. Just go up the street. Go have a bite to eat. And we did. And I don't know if I just had such severe PTSD, but my anxiety, I felt every fiber in my body hyperventilating that I had to get back to that room.
Yeah.
And it was the invasive thoughts of like, I'm not there right now, and this is the moment my baby's gonna die. And it was terrifying.
I had a lot of anxiety around, and my husband was so chill about it, but for care, so we had a 30-minute commute, but by the time you find parking, you get to the hospital, you wait for the elevator, I'd call the nurse on the way, be like, I'm on my way, like, don't start without me, I can do cares, like, and just the anxiety of getting to the hospital and doing cares and being late, like, oh.
You also talked about how, as a social worker, the advocacy part was strongly affected in a good way when you were in the NICU, because you learned how to advocate, and you learned that you walked into an experience where you knew specific questions to ask, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something that Brittany and I have touched on before, but it's also something that has always stuck with me from our main support group, which is Hope for HIE. If you've never heard of it, it's essentially the main support group for across the whole globe for hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. And one of their target campaigns is always kind of trying to help bring resources to support NICU. And from them is when I started to realize and reevaluate my experience in NICU, how there really wasn't resources for, especially in our case, for full-term babies, because NICU is just so heavily focused on preemies. But NICU is for all neonatal, right? So it's not just preemies. And they have such a huge focus on this. And I'm curious what insights or recommendations you would give now that you've had the lived experience of being a social worker prior and then being a social worker during a NICU stay. What would you recommend could help NICUs and other support staff in NICUs support parents?
Honestly, it's so isolating in the NICU, and I might get teary-eyed. I was there 3 months and never once connected with another mom. And granted, it was kind of the COVID and only, immediate parents could go. There was one mom that ended up being my NICU neighbor, and I got her number, and we still chat to this day. And it's so isolating as it is because you're so in it, but even just being able to connect with moms in there or saying hello, especially if you're there day in and day out, just being able to say hi, like, how are you doing? That goes such a long way. I'd say don't be afraid to ask questions. for me, one of the hardest things that I kick myself today is like, I didn't know it was okay to ask to hold my baby. I didn't hold my baby.
I didn't know that either.
No, neither did I.
It was 8 days until I could do skin to skin. And he was intubated and had all the stuff. But, you know, I asked the nurses, I asked to see the social work team. I wanted, you know, the NICU support resources online. The one that I used that was really helpful, that even just the advocacy piece, Hand to Hold, is based in Texas. And you know, they have one-on-ones and support. And the first one I went to, it ended up being just the facilitator and me. And she was more like a parent mentor that had gone through it. And one of the things I learned was you can ask for a primary nurse to follow you for day shift and night shift. And so being there for 3 months, I continually, once I learned that, maybe halfway through, and it's good for the babies to have the same consistent caregiver in the NICU. And so I think the things that empowered me for the advocacy is like, this is your baby. Even though it might not feel it because nurses are taking care of it, like, you know your baby best. And that instinct and that gut feeling that you have, if something doesn't feel right, if you're confused about something, like, they're going to be your baby when you go home, like the full range. And you have that bond and that connection. So I don't know if that answers the question, but the advocacy piece, I think just asking questions, trying to connect or just say hello, you know, in the NICU bubble, and ask for what you need.
I think that that's really important, because if I had heard that when I was in the NICU, it would have helped a lot, because I very specifically remember sitting there and thinking, what's my place? Because I'm watching everybody else care for my baby, and I knew I didn't even have to be there. And that's not an experience that any typical mother has to go through if they just bring their baby home. Like, you're there, and if you're not there, then your baby's not thriving or surviving. And so it was really, really, really difficult. And I wasn't able to hold Cyrus. He was on cooling. So Courtney, I don't know if you had a similar experience, but they didn't want him touched the entire time that he was on cooling. The last day that he was supposed to be warmed and he wasn't, I was a disaster. I was just like, I thought it would be the day I'd hold my baby, and I wasn't. And I remember Tina, the nurse that we had, it's like, she's an angel to me. And I came in the room and she was like, sit your ass in the chair. We're putting this baby in your lap right now. And they put a pillow down and they picked him up, and he was all wrapped in the cooling blankets, and he had I think he had a helmet, like a cooling headpiece on, and they, like, all the wires, and they took him and they put him in my lap, and it was like he was right there. And I always laugh, but that's our first family portrait. It's like me and Kyle in the NICU. And if I heard that and heard that I could ask for things, and
you don't know what you don't know. And thank God for the nurses that offer that. Like, do you want to hold your baby? It hadn't even crossed my mind that I could, because they always, in the beginning, especially when they're not that stable, it's the safe hold. It's the cupping the feet for the womb, like, you know. And no other moms, apart from NICU, have the special, like, I can actually just touch my baby. I can hold my baby's hand.
I tell all of my friends that, not that I have many, but, like, I've had a couple friends that have done the NICU experience, and now, since I've gone through it, I always tell them, I'm like, ask to do everything. Ask to be involved in feeds if your baby has a feeding tube. Ask to do baths.
I love
ask
baths.
to change diapers. We never had a nurse that said no. I remember once he was warmed up, once he was stable, once he was breastfeeding, it was a lot of, I wanted to be more involved. So even taking his body temperature, because he struggled with maintaining his body temperature after he was warmed, which is typical. And they were like, no, go ahead, take his temperature, do it twice, and, you know, write it down, and you can weigh his diaper, and you can, and I was like, what? I didn't know I could do this.
The independence.
I know. Yeah. Like, feeling responsible, which is great.
The NICU is not a place for type A people. Like, you cannot plan for anything. Yeah. You can't plan when you're going to take them home. You can't plan for, you know, and it's all so up in the air. And so I remember just my motto was the one day at a time, just one day at a time. And for the advocacy piece of speaking for what you need or what you want, we had the Ronald rooms. It could only hold one parent. It was a little twin size bed, a floor above. I did that stay 2 or 3 times in the hospital. So they'd call it a breastfeeding or bottle feeding challenge, where you could be in a room for, 72 hours and go down for all the cares or skip one care and sleep through the night and try to really practice bottling in preps to hopefully come home. We did that, 2 or 3 times, but I had to ask for that, like ask for a room, when it would be open, when could I get scheduled, prepare for my husband to be alone with the in-laws. And I think the hardest part is leaving the NICU without your baby. And it was one of those things I advocated for, because I wanted that time and wanted to try to see if we could bottle and build my confidence with him, but his practice with it. And so even just the prepared, like, you can have all the tools, and that's, I think, what I've learned the most too, especially with the feeding and the milestones and all of that stuff. Like, it's on the baby's timeline. Like, we as parents have these expectations, and that's not fair to a baby that's been through all this trauma and their body remembers. And it's like, we have to give up, again, that type A, that control of like our expectations that we want that. And even if it's in their best interest, like, we want our kids to eat, like, we want them to enjoy food. But if they're not safe doing it, if they can't swallow yet, if they're adjusted to age and they're not ready, even though mentally, like, if we've been with them that long, it's not fair for us to have failed expectations and that loss of hope. And then that kind of that resentment on your child that, like, you should be doing this. And then that comparison of like, other kids are doing these. Why can't my child do this? And so that's been, the advocacy piece on the outside of NICU, scheduling, medical appointments, all the different resources, early intervention, all the therapies, like navigating all of those, and then knowing full swing, but also taking a break. If you're going on vacation, don't schedule, like, take a break. You can burn out with that too. And I've learned that balance too. But the biggest thing I've had to do is just let go of that control. And once I have let go, it makes our relationship more enjoyable. It takes the pressure off him, and he can sense that, especially feeding in the beginning. Like, bottles, when we first got home, he was just, it got negative. And it's always, especially feeding, has to come from a place of this positive family experience, whether he's eating or not.
The pressures of feeding from medical professionals is so overwhelming and unnatural. Yeah. They like never calculate or put into thought how a neurotypical able-bodied child just eats. It is an ebb and a flow. When I watch how Luca, my youngest, has developed in terms of feeding from birth to now, and I think about the really strict restrictions and expectations they put on Lino and that I put on Lino because they were putting it on Lino. Mm-hmm. It was like we were all just throwing all these expectations at Lino. It's so unnatural. Yeah. Like, it's so unnatural to demand that a child eat a certain amount of ounces every certain amount of hours. That is unnatural. It doesn't work like that.
Well, the G-tube's unnatural in itself. Like, missing that whole process. The G-tube's a mindfuck. Like, it's such a medical, it's not natural. And it's such this medical, and so my husband and I have gone back and forth of like, I'd have anxiety if we went 3.5 hours or 4 hours because we had an appointment. I'm like, we got to get home. We got to feed him. What if he's hungry? Yes. He's not showing those cues. Yeah. And like, I got to keep him alive. He's got to eat. And we balance each other out pretty well, but it's stressful.
So it's so accurate though. It's so accurate. It's like anytime that we leave the house, because we're kind of like in the middle of nowhere. So even to just like get to the city is a little bit of a hike, but even just to go out, it's like so much preparation just to be like, do we have feeds? Do we have enough water? Are we going to be able to do this? And then with Alden, I'm just like, just throw in a pouch. He's fine. And I'm like, it's crazy, the difference. And I find that feeding is the one thing that I'm constantly stressed about. Yeah. Even if like my husband goes out and he's like, oh, I'm going to take the boys to my mom. I'm like, make sure you have everything. Is the pump charged? Like, and then it's like, what if it dies? Well, I mean, we've skipped meals for Cyrus before, either like with time constraints or he just wasn't tolerating it. And anytime he gets sick, I mean, we cut way back on his feeds. The kid's not going to die from one skipped meal, but it feels like it.
They've made it feel that way, though, in the beginning.
Yeah.
They made me feel like he was going to die. And at the same rate, we were late to the G-tube game in terms of Lino didn't come out of NICU with any feeding tube. So we came home and... Yeah, that's right. So both Cyrus and Lino got their G-tubes later in life. Lino did start with an NG tube, but regardless, it was a situation where all that pressure was on me and my husband as parents to ensure our child was thriving by eating, and he wasn't. He was failure to thrive. And we were constantly doing weigh-ins every 2 to 3 days, and it was chaos. And honestly, our first medical team was fucking awful. It was the worst, and they just weren't helpful. And we went months where the kid was not eating. So feeding is such a stressful journey. It seems like something that is so simple. You think, okay, well, feeding a child, and it is, holy shit, is it not? And I am still traumatized to this day. I have such PTSD when it comes to anything related to feeding. And I do project that onto Luca unintentionally. And I fight this all the time with my husband, because even my husband still does it. Well, he'll be like, well, Luca hasn't eaten in 3 hours. All right.
I'll do
but he'll tell us when he wants to eat. He goes around signing eat, like he's not just going to sit in a corner and like starve himself to death. Yeah. But we have so much trauma regarding it, and we just carry it and we project it everywhere. It's awful.
That schedule of it. I mean, we're doing 6 feeds a day, and his bedtime, last one's around 7:30, and we have to wake him up around 10:30 for that last one. And I feel so bad. Like a normal kid would be sleeping at bedtime, sleeping through the night. Our story is a little different. In order for him to be discharged, he had to have the G-tube because he was so inconsistent. So that's a blessing in that I didn't have to stress when we got home. It kind of took the pressure off of that. But even going home, like, they never told us or taught us how to vent the tube before a feed. So when we got home months later, he would just be wailing, crying because he had all this trapped air. And now that he's older, he has all the reflux still. And just like the trauma that his little body's going through of like, you're trying to eat and then the association of like a full tummy and I'm vomiting. Yeah. And it's such trial and error because it's like, okay, is it constipation? Is it sickness? Is it too much volume? Is he still full from the last feed? Like, it's so much to navigate.
And I want to say it takes like a lot of courage and bravery, not just with the outside medical professionals, but within yourself once you kind of start getting the hang of it. And then you go like, well, maybe I could experiment. Maybe I can do this on my own. I mean, the amount of things that we've adjusted and changed for Cyrus since he got his G-tube is just obnoxious. I mean, it's constant trial and error, but we're in a good spot now. It was almost like, I remember the first time that we kind of started adjusting things, Cyrus was getting 4 feeds a day. He was getting a feed really late at night. And I was like, this just isn't working. We need to bring this to 3 feeds a day. So we adjusted it to what worked best for his body and what worked best for our family, too, because there's also that whole aspect. Yeah. And I remember, like, they were like, wait, what? What? You did what? You need our permission first. Yeah. And I was like, I don't need anyone's permission to feed my kid. If he's healthy, if he's thriving, if his weight's looking good, if, his blood work's looking good, like, why do I need permission to feed my kid? And because there's this whole medical aspect of, well, it's a medical device. It is a medical device. And because of that, you're taught that you need permission to feed your kid. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to the NICU stuff, right? Yeah. Where it's like this whole going against the instinct of doing something as primal and basic as feeding your child.
And then the power dynamic of it. Like providers don't encourage your own independence with it. No. And then having to run things by. It's almost like that NICU experience of like having to ask permission to hold your kid versus being on the outside, still having these medical providers over you, having to ask permission to do these things.
It starts to extinguish what you were saying earlier, Jen, that natural instinct where, you really do have to trust your gut. Me and Brittany are huge advocates when it comes to feeding And this is not just the blended food advocacy part of it either. I know a lot of our followers know all about our blended food advocacy, but you have to trust your gut. And so many times we lean on medical professionals because we don't trust that.
Yeah.
Brittany is saying how she just kind of adjusted things for Cyrus. I have done that so many times with Lino, and every time I adjust it based on my gut, it always works to his benefit. Yeah, it might still need some tweaking, meaning like that initial change might not do the trick. I might still have to tweak it a little bit, but just following that gut response of like something's not right. Either it's too many meals in a day or it's too much volume, whatever the case is, you really do have to on some level trust your gut. And obviously I don't mean push the boundaries too far if your child has a medical condition that requires a specific diet and a specific feeding regimen. I'm not saying question that if the medicine is saying like this is what your child needs in order to survive. I'm not saying that. But if that's not the case and there is no true medical reason for your child to just be on a formula when he's 7 years old, you have to really trust that instinct, to be like, well, if my 7-year-old wasn't disabled, would my 7-year-old still be having formula? You have to trust those things. But so we get that gut instinct really is diminished in a lot of ways, how the medical community will receive those questions if we ask them too much. Sometimes I just don't ask.
I don't either.
And I think being in the NICU every single day, you become accustomed to the medical piece, whereas my husband, he still had to go to work, so he would come when he could, but it was on weekends mostly and holidays. But like, he's very empowered. We balance each other, because even now I'm like, well, if we want to get rid of that 6 feed, we should ask if that's okay. Like, I don't want to lose. That's a lot of volume to lose. And especially if he didn't gain weight this last week, like, I don't want to make any changes without. And so I'm still very like, I want the okay, versus my husband's like, he's very in tune with his instincts. And he's like, we don't need to ask permission. So that's something I still need to get comfortable with.
So Jen, I know you've mentioned a little bit earlier how you are so thankful for the support system you have through your friends and families. But I did want to talk a little bit about the Miracle Kid Network. Yeah. And although you have support from friends and families, you obviously needed support elsewhere as well, which seems to be the guiding light that led you to create the Miracle Kid Network. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. And so I created this on Mother's Day, and we're new to New Mexico. We don't have really a community built here. We've been here 2 years, and all of my friends are on the West Coast. All of our outings are all just doctor's appointments. And now he's almost reaching a year. I'm like, I want him to start meeting other kids. We need some social interaction outside of doctor's appointments, and I need some connection with moms that are medical moms that have gone through a NICU experience. Because again, my friends can be supportive, but you don't know unless you've gone through it and can connect on that way. And so on Mother's Day, I'm like, we have a really great park near us, and it's probably the best in the state. And so I'm like, I'm going to start this group, because again, in my community, when I was in the NICU, there was nothing. There were no in-person support groups. Even, being discharged from the NICU back home, it's so isolating. Yeah, Miracle Kids Parent Support Network. The original OG idea was, local community play groups, having all ages of kids, siblings of kids, meeting in a park. We're still kind of determining if it's going to be a weekly or monthly. We've had one so far, and one other family came, and she lives right down the road from me. The Facebook group is really for private, local families that, are either in the NICU, coming freshly out of. I've had a lot of our EI providers, even our Hearing Institute, that I've kind of shared this with. It's also good for me that I'm not used to working. Like, it's a big identity shift to go from full-on motherhood, but also now staying at home with my kiddo and all the demands and missing the socialization and an adult connection and not being a therapist anymore. And that's a big shift. And so it's like a passion project now for me to be able to meet other families. And the Instagram is more for the kind of the parent support resources, the inspirational stuff of like, these are things I wish I would have heard when I was going through that.
Oh, yeah. I love the Instagram. Like, I'm not even in the NICU anymore with Cyrus, and some of your posts, I'm just like, I get teary-eyed, and I'm like, I wish I saw this Instagram when we were in the NICU, because it's so validating, and it's just to like help parents, especially moms, like be a little bit softer on themselves.
Oh, for sure. It's so easy to come up with this content because it's like, that's what I was going through. That's what I was experiencing. Like and now being on the outside, we've been home for 9 months and he'll be a year next month. And, it's a lot easier to have that kind of perspective.
And that's the thing, is that it's so like, oh man, I really wish that there were something local. And maybe there is, and maybe there's just not enough platform for me to know about it. But at Napa, I have been hounding them to create like a once a month or every other month. And I've been like, you guys need to create a play group. Like, just like, we'll pay some therapists, and we'll go to a playground and like, parents can just come together, and then kids with similar abilities can all come together, and like the therapists can help and the parents can mingle and this and that. And
it's beneficial for the parents, but it's also beneficial to the kids to see kids like them. Because even like I had a friend fly out of state to come visit, and she brought her 1-year-old, and granted Luca was 10 months adjusted. Like they're similar in age, but with the adjusted it's a few months. And like I had to mentally and emotionally prepare myself to not compare where they're at. And like I couldn't even go down that road. And I think with Miracle Kids and the playgroup, like it kind of takes that component all out of it, And
it's so good for the kids. Cyrus loves when he gets co-treatments with other kids with disabilities like him. He gets so excited because he doesn't have anyone like that at school in his class specifically. And so for him to be like, you use a wheelchair, I use a wheelchair, this is so cool.
Normalizes.
Or like see somebody in a gait trainer and he's in a gait trainer, and all of a sudden they're running down the halls together and they're gait trainers. It's like he lights up and he loves it, and it's so important. And when those resources aren't available to these kids and these parents, it's harmful for the parents, but even more so, it's really harmful for these kids.
Yeah, it's harmful for the whole family. I remember when we got Cyrus and Lino together for the first time up in Boston at the aquarium, and the way they would like look at each other was like, they were just like, dude, there's like fish over there. It's awesome. And just to see that, because we unfortunately, prior to school, I can count on one hand how many times Lino has had quote unquote play dates, because some of them I won't even call play dates, because they really were just more like he was near another child who was disabled or not disabled for that matter. I think, Brittany makes a good point. There might be places in our states, even very close to us, but there is this problem where there's not enough information and resources out there to even know.
Yeah, it's so small knit. And like we have play groups for our deaf and hearing aid community, but that's just that specific niche. So what I like about ours is it's all encompassing of medical. It's not just a specific thing. And I think as a mom in her 30s, it's hard to meet if you're not working. Like usually our friends are made from high school, college, in our community or churches, wherever. But when you're staying at home, you're isolated. As a mom, it's hard to meet other people. It's hard to meet friends. And then if your child who has medical can do intramural sports teams, I struggle with the idea of like a daycare, because again, the advocacy of, is there going to be a nurse? Do I even trust somebody else to do his G2 feeds if he's still on G2 feeds? And so it really opens opportunities to be able to have those kids that maybe were secluded from other opportunities have a place.
And now you also mentioned how like the Instagram account is a little bit more resource based since the group itself is more local. What are some of the resources that you put out there and supply to caregivers and parents?
Yeah, so it's kind of twofold. Some of them are specific to NICU, parents going through it right now. So like I mentioned, Hand to Hold was a big one that I used. There's some Zoom parent support groups, and even some of those NICU groups have specific support groups for like NICU dads or, you know, parents of color that can join and have their experience shared. So, you know, a lot of those. And then a lot of the educational stuff are like, I follow this one great PT in Texas, and she, you know, does a lot of adjusted age and just specific therapy movements you can do for like crawling, sitting up, rolling, activities for your kids when they're, you know, home from the NICU or have low tone, or torticollis was a big one for us too. So it's kind of twofold, NICU, and then a lot of the different therapies, a lot of feeding therapy pages I follow that I reshare a lot too, because it's a mental thing for me of like, oh, I need to keep this for future reference. So
I have so many things bookmarked, so it's great to know that it's great to know that your Instagram has like a place of bookmarks so that I could just go and find.
Yeah, save.
No, we'll definitely link up some of your stuff in the description of your episodes so that our listeners could go and check out those resources. And if local to you, that they can check out maybe your next play dates.
Yeah.
Which would be so exciting.
Awesome.
Get some new people involved.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing too, kind of resource wise, is just the mental health in motherhood, especially mental health in medical motherhood. Because a lot of the time we don't have a place or space to talk about the anxiety or the PTSD or the trauma, the depression that comes along with, you know, the expectation versus reality, the birth trauma we went through, like all that stuff. And if you don't process it, it comes up in other ways, you know, nightmares, flashback, like whatever that looks like to you. And so I'm actually on my channel holding a lot of new mom guests that are just coming out from the NICU, that because I remember when I came out, there wasn't a place that I could just share my story front to back. You know, it was little snippets, but there's such healing in retelling and sharing your story. And like, even I had one this week where she's like, this is the first time I'm like telling it front to end, and I'm remembering things that I forgot about as I'm retelling it. And so there's such power and healing in being able to have that opportunity.
Do you think when you're able to, because I imagine it's probably hard to do this, but do you think when you're able to completely detach kind of yourself from the mother part of it and just be kind of like therapist, counselor, social worker in your head, what other advice might you give to parents that are going through this, whether they're in the early stages or not? What do you think some of the key things that you've learned since your journey?
I had a very traumatic birth delivery. I had a placenta abruption and no symptoms at all. I was in the C-section, emergency C-section, for an hour and a half versus 3 hours because I lost probably 2 liters of blood. My blood pressure was 60. Yeah, we're both lucky to be alive. And so the advocacy piece of postpartum, you know, usually it's, you have maybe one follow-up and then again in six to 8 weeks, and then you're the cleared. And it's almost like, you know, throughout your pregnancy, you get all these checkups and it's all about the baby. And then as soon as you empty your canal, you're just a vessel, you're just mom now, like, but your body's healing, your mind, you're sleep deprived, a lot of postpartum depression, anxiety, and sleep deprived in that we were feeding G-tube feeds every 3 hours through the night too, you know, and then upright for an hour after that. And so I requested to meet with that provider, the OB. I had probably 3 or 4 appointments with her after we cried that first follow-up appointment with her. She wanted to see me right after discharge, and I got a chance to thank her and ask questions. And so, you know, a lot of those postpartum visits, you can request more. If you need more support, don't just go for the physical, go for the mental too, the emotional. If you're struggling, talk to somebody. They have the questionnaire screeners that determine, and it's so hard hard to determine, okay, is it depression? Is it anxiety? Your hormones are out of whack? You're sleep deprived? Like trying to weed through, but usually there's a time frame but if you're having thoughts of suicide or self-harm or anything like that, seek help and go through your doctor is probably the first point of contact for that. And there's probably support groups out there on that piece too. And for me, I think for the trauma narrative and retelling your story, there's pros and cons. You really have to be ready for it. You know, I actually went to 2 or 3 therapists after discharge throughout my NICU experience. And they say like doctors make the worst patients or whatever. Same for therapists. Like if you've never been to therapy, shop around. You know, you don't hurt therapist feelings if it's not a good fit. This is about your healing and your growth. And if you're continuing to go like the people pleasing, if you're going to somebody that's not helpful or you're not comfortable with, you're not healing. You're not going to be able to feel comfortable to do the work. You have to be really comfortable with that person. So shop around, take a few sessions, word of mouth. You can request and advocate. You want a female, you want a male, like whatever that looks like.
Therapy should not cause anxiety.
No, it should not. No. Or dread, or it should be like this self-care, like this mental self-care.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for like everybody should go to therapy. I started going to therapy, I think Cyrus was around 3 months old, and never looked back. I was like, nope, this is great.
Well, and what a gift you're giving to your child.
Yeah.
A healthy mind and body for a mom. You can be present and not pass along any stuff, or, you know, a lot of people that I've seen too, just statistically, like trauma, you find different coping devices. Some are healthy, some can be drugs, some can be alcohol. Yeah. And like that impacts your future, your child too. And so you're doing the hard work now to help, you know, give your child a safe, you know, healthy space too.
For me, the greatest thing that I've gotten out of therapy is being able to separate my trauma from Cyrus's trauma, and then being able to work on my trauma without involving Cyrus, if that makes sense. Like I've been able to focus on my trauma and what triggers me, and separate that and respect Cyrus, respect his trauma, and respect his boundaries and all that. And because I've separated the two, like I've been able to heal so much because I'm not trying to fix his trauma.
You're not carrying that.
Because I can't fix his trauma, right? Like I can't fix that, but I can fix mine. And that's really what therapy has really helped me do. And gosh, if there's one thing I would hope any parent can do that goes through this is to know that there is a separation of trauma to some extent. I mean, they're intertwined. I'm not going to say they're not, but if you can just focus on your trauma and start that healing process.
Yeah. For me, especially anxiety, especially on the medical, I resonated when you said reflux was your trigger. And like, if Luca's going through a reflux, I don't need to be hover, smother, mother, are you okay? Like, I don't need to be putting my anxiety on him. Because anxiety is one of the most contagious feelings, you know?
Yes. It took a long time for me to not do that with Cyrus. I mean, like, literally the last year. But, yeah, my husband and I both, as soon as, like, the reflux or the vomiting, or especially when we're out in public and I start, like, getting hot, and I'm like, and I'm, like, red as a tomato. Yeah.
It takes a long time to retrain your brain, but your body, too. It's all,
And it's not their fault. I had to sit back and I was like, this is triggering for me because I can't help him. But it's not his fault. And if I'm coming at him from a place of anxiety, he's going to think he's doing something wrong. And he's not. And then especially after Alden was born, I was like, if he's going to see us react differently to Alden having a stomach bug or vomiting or anything like that, and then we're not as anxious because it doesn't happen as frequently, but then with Cyrus we're super anxious, he's gonna internalize that and he's gonna be like, what did I do wrong? And then that just makes things worse. Like, then he's vomiting even more.
Well, I applaud both of you that you have gone on to have second children. Because I'm in this place too. Like, I always wanted a big family, like 3 kids, my husband 2, because he was an only child. But like the trauma and so my delivery, I was monitored. I was a kind of high risk pregnancy. I was monitored that morning at 11, and the non-stress, he scored 10 out of 10, practice breathing. By 5-6 hours later, I'm in the ER.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I don't know if I can, like, I know I need to do a lot more processing and trauma work and anxiety to even think about having another kid, because, and just the what ifs of like, what if the next kid has any, what if we're in the NICU again? What if, like, I don't know if I could handle that. So that's probably another topic, but I'd so be curious to hear from you both of like, when were you ready? Like what, you
Never.
know?
Okay. Never ready.
Never
Just
ready.
throwing that out there.
Okay.
I was never fucking ready. Okay. I just had this feeling. Mentally, I was still struggling with a lot of things. I still am struggling with a lot of things. And it's been very hard adding another child to the mix. But I just had this gut feeling, that internal voice. It was just a random day. And it was like, dude, go have another.
Yeah.
And I just said, fuck it, we're gonna fucking do this shit, because if I try to plan this and I try to, if I thought too much about it, I was definitely going to scare the shit out of myself and just walk away, and I really, there was a lot of just trusting that inner voice that just kept saying to me, you want more, go have more. And I think there was certainly a level of mental healing that happens. I can't exactly pinpoint a particular thing that happened that made me feel like I could handle it, but there was just this inner voice that just said, hey, you can do this, go do it. And I just trusted that. I just kind of went with it. Yeah. And it definitely was the greatest decision. But there is a lot of, I have made many posts about this, that I do encourage trusting that inner voice and that gut feeling, and trusting yourself. You as a mother, you've already been through so much and you're rocking it, right?
Like,
so
what else could I handle?
Nothing
I
else.
can handle
there's
everything.
nothing else that could happen.
That's how it was for me and Kyle, is that we were just like, we never thought we could do what we're doing with Cyrus. My pregnancy was super, super healthy. Like, he was healthy. Everything was great until it wasn't at delivery. And so literally up until he came out, we had all the intention that we were going to have a healthy baby and everything was going to be as easy as pie. And it wasn't. And when we kind of started learning about the brain damage and the possible outcomes from that and all that, it really kind of got to like, how are we going to do this? And then we just did, because we really didn't have a choice. So when it came time to kind of sitting back, processing, and being like, Cyrus deserves a sibling. Even though he's disabled, he still deserves that aspect of family. And it was a really, I have a sister, my husband has a brother, and so we wanted that. And we were like, his disability should not be what holds him back from having that experience.
I love that.
We had the same thing as Courtney, like, what if, like, the same thing as you, Jen, like, what if something goes wrong? What if we're in the NICU again? What if we have another baby with HIE because we didn't know that we were going to have a first one and this and that? And we just sat back. And there was a moment when I looked at my husband and I was like, I'm prepared. Whatever happens to this baby, like, I've gone through it all, right? Like, what, we have a second baby that has medical complexities. Okay, guess what? I'm better off now knowing how to navigate that. We have a second baby that needs therapy. Like, we can navigate that. We have a second baby that goes into the NICU. We've done that. We're pros at that now. Yeah, and so it was like, whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and we're more prepared now than we were with Cyrus, and we didn't think we could handle what we're handling. And we are, and we'll handle a second baby no matter what the outcome is, and we'll be great. And Courtney and I say a lot. We say all the time, a healthy baby is not the end-all be-all. A living baby is what's important. Yeah. And especially, like, the three of us having all come really close to not having our babies, no matter what the medical complexities, no matter what the disabilities are, the living baby is the outcome that we all need. For sure. Right?
For sure. I remember when the nurse told me his APGAR score. I had no idea what an APGAR was.
Neither
and the
did
nurse
I.
randomly
Neither did I.
told us one day, like, and it was the thing that just made me bawl, like have a breakdown in the NICU. His APGAR scores were 1.
Yeah,
And then
Cyrus
20
too.
minutes later, it was 1 or a 2 or something.
Yeah. Those numbers are ingrained in my head for life.
Mine
Yeah.
too.
146. I mean,
Yeah.
146, 146,
Yeah.
146.
Yeah.
And when you first see the APGAR chart, it really is traumatizing because when you actually are shown why it's graded the way it's graded, and you're like, so pretty much like 1 and 0 are like not alive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Essentially.
We have like differentiating reports where Cyrus was either 0 or 1. I mean, he came out, he was blue, he was floppy. I actually have a picture of him literally like in the midst of being put on my chest, and you can see he had a nuchal cord, and you can actually see my thumb under the cord, because when I was going through all like, I'm gonna have a baby, I should research this, I heard nuchal cords are super common, and all you gotta do is unwrap that sucker. And so I was like, oh, look, he's got a cord around his neck, people do this all the time, I'm just gonna shove my thumb under there. And I could barely get my thumb under because of how tight it was. And so there's actually the picture of me on the hospital bed and him coming out, and I have my thumb underneath his cord trying to unwrap it, and they ended up just having to cut it and unwrap it. But yeah, so he was either 0 or 1, but when I think about that now, I'm like, oh god. Like, I had no idea back then, you know, he was that. And then I remember they put him on the little warmer or whatever, and I remember hearing like a couple squeaks, if that, from him, and then they took him out, and I had no idea after that. But yeah,
That's traumatizing. Yeah, and my husband's experience is so different because I was on the table and the epidural, and I got nauseous. I was thrown up and just very in and out of consciousness. And I remember, like, I thought it was right after when they said, okay, he's out. And I thought I asked right away, but I guess my husband said it was like 10 or 15 minutes after I asked. I was like, I don't hear him. Is he crying? Is he, you know? And my husband asked, like, is he... And he looked at the anesthesiologist next to me, who looked at the nurse that was taking, and all he saw was the nurse shake her head no. And so that's really what he remembers in that moment. And even looking at pictures, it's a weird thing of like... you almost feel shame of you don't have those newborn pictures, you don't have the skin to skin right after, but it's sad. It's feelings of sadness.
Yeah.
You can still see the bruises where he was resuscitated, you know? And so it's even hard. His birthday will be end of July. He's a year. And so trauma anniversaries too, and I told my husband, I was like, you know, I'm celebrating me too. I survived. The stuff we have done this year, I know it's about him, but he's still young enough to not know how to open gifts. Like, I'm gonna celebrate this first year.
I always think that first year should really be reserved for the moms, because like
Seriously.
it's not just the baby that's born, right? It's like a whole new person that you're born into, becoming a mom and having to adjust to all that. And like the first year should definitely, I mean, yeah, good job, kid, but the first year.
Well, but even at that age, what are they doing to celebrate themselves?
They're not gonna remember.
So why can't we just put the focus on mama?
I'll take a present. I'll take some cake. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like, hi, I did that. I grew all that, you know, for 9 months or whatever. So.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Jen, I honestly think I could chat with you two
I
ladies
know.
like for
I know.
hours on end.
Hours.
Yeah.
And it just feels so natural, and I'm just so pleased to have, virtually met you, not really in person. But I'm so pleased to have had you on the show today, and I really hope that you would come join us again and maybe
absolutely.
discuss some different topics.
I would love to.
Yeah, I think it would just be so awesome, and maybe one day we can all meet in person.
That'd be so fun. That'd be so fun. No, this was like very therapeutic for me too, just connecting with other moms apart from baby time. Thank you so much for having me, and I would love to come on again in the future.
We'll have you anytime you're ready, because I think it'll be so helpful for other parents too, especially, you know, if anyone going through the NICU who's in there right now, I feel like they would get so much out of this episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to thank all of our listeners who tuned in to the Bitching and Bolusing Podcast. You can follow Jen on her Instagram, Miracle Kids and Parent Support Network. It's wonderful. We love it. We'll link it down below, and you can just go straight there, and there's so much just great resources, and it's so inspirational. And I'm not even in the NICU anymore, and I still love reading all of it. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Bitching and Bolusing Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe for future episodes. Previous episodes can be heard on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. If you like what we said, please be sure to give us a share. You can follow us on Instagram at Bitching and Bolusing. And you can visit us at www.bitchingandbolusing.com.